Today, we're diving into one of the Bible's most troubling, most debated stories. It's a story about a celebrated hero, a huge military victory, and a promise to God that seems to end in absolute horror.
So the man at the center of this whole thing is named Jephthah. And get this, he's listed in the New Testament's Hall of Faith, right alongside giants like Moses and David. He's praised for his incredible trust in God. And yet, he is infamous for one thing, a vow that, according to centuries of tradition, led him to sacrifice his own daughter. So how on earth can both of those be true? How can you be a hero of faith and a child murderer?
Before we even get to the vow, let's just look at the man himself. Who was this guy? Well, the Bible calls him a mighty warrior for starters. But he wasn't just some brute. This was a devout man. He knew his history, he knew the scriptures, and he always gave credit for his victories to God, not himself. Again, he's praised in the New Testament for his faith. This is the kind of character background that makes what he does next so utterly shocking.
And here it is, the vow that made him infamous. He's about to go into a huge battle, and he promises God that if he wins, the very first thing that comes out of his house to greet him will belong to the Lord. And he will offer it up as a burnt offering. Notice that word, and. It seems to link these two things together into one single, unbreakable, and, frankly, terrible promise.
So what happens? He wins the battle, he comes home a hero, and the first thing to run out and greet him is his daughter, his only child. The tragic end seems unavoidable. And for centuries, that's how it's been read. A faithful but incredibly rash man who has to follow through on a horrific promise. But what if that entire interpretation, that whole tragic story, hangs on a single, crucial mistranslation? What if one little word unlocks a completely different story?
Okay, let's get into the weeds here, because this is where it gets fascinating. The entire key to unlocking this whole mystery is a tiny, one-letter word in the original Hebrew, a simple conjunction that can have two very, very different meanings.
That little word is the Hebrew letter vav. Now, it's one of the most common words in the language, and most of the time it just means and. But, and this is the game changer, it also has a well-known secondary meaning, or. And listen, this isn't some new theory somebody cooked up. We're talking about prominent ancient Jewish commentators, guys like Rabbi David Kimchi way back in the 12th century who pointed this out. They argue that you have to look at the context to know if it's connecting two ideas or presenting two different options.
So let's look at the difference this makes. It is huge. The traditional reading using and gives you one awful connected action. It will be the Lord's and I will sacrifice it. But if that little vav actually means or, the whole vow is transformed. It becomes a promise with two different possibilities. It will be the Lord's or I will offer it as a burnt offering. It's not one terrible fate. It's a choice between two outcomes.
And this isn't just wishful thinking. The precedent for this is all over the Bible. I mean, look at Exodus. The law says you get punished for striking your father or your mother, not that you have to strike them both to get in trouble. That will be a very specific crime. This use of or is grammatically rock solid, and it's all over the scriptures that Jephthah would have known inside and out.
So, if we take this or reading and plug it back into Jephthah's vow, how does it change things? Well, the entire story gets rebuilt from the ground up. This changes the vow from a reckless gamble into a really intelligent, legally sound promise. Jephthah basically prepared for two outcomes. Outcome A, if a person comes out, they'll be dedicated to God for life, which was an established practice. Outcome B, if a sacrificially clean animal, like a sheep or goat, comes out, then that will be the burnt offering. So when his daughter steps out of the house, boom, outcome A is triggered. Her fate is dedication, not death.
And you know what? The text itself leaves us clues that point right to this. After Jephthah supposedly fulfills his vow, the narrator adds this very specific, almost strange detail. His daughter had never been with a man. Now just think about that for a second. If she was killed as a burnt offering, why on earth would that detail matter?
That's the whole point. It's completely irrelevant for a sacrifice. But for a vow of lifelong service and celibacy to God, well, then it becomes the most essential detail in the story. It confirms that she lived out her life unmarried and childless. And for Jephthah, that was the true painful sacrifice, the end of his family line.
And there's one last amazing piece of evidence. The story says that every year the women of Israel went to lament Jephthah's daughter. Now that sounds like mourning, right? But the original Hebrew word used here, tanah, is incredibly rare. It only shows up one other time in the whole Bible,
And in that other spot, it's translated as to recount or to rehearse. This suggests her friends weren't going to a grave to mourn her death. They were going to visit her, to talk with her, and to celebrate the life of service she was living.
So why does sorting out the grammar of an ancient promise matter to us today? Because the implications here are huge. They change not just how we see Jephthah, but they have a lot to say about God's character and the power of tradition itself.
So the takeaway is really threefold. First, this reading makes the story consistent with the rest of the Bible, which says over and over that God finds human sacrifice abhorrent. That was what the pagan nations did. Second, it's a huge reminder that powerful traditions can sometimes completely overshadow what the original text actually says. And finally, it shows us the power of going back to the source. A close, careful reading can uncover a truth that just makes a whole lot more sense.
You know, this story doesn't just solve an ancient puzzle. It really leaves us with a big question for today. What other long-held beliefs, what other common truths do we just accept as fact because that's what we've always been told? It's a challenge to all of us to look a little closer, to question our assumptions, and to go check the source for ourselves.